In the fall of 1971, from the quiet coastal town of Astoria, Oregon, a gentle librarian named Clara Hayes vanished from her home, leaving only a half-eaten lunch on her kitchen table. For 52 years, her disappearance remained one of Oregon's most haunting cold cases. Her family was tormented by questions, and police were left with no witnesses, no suspects, and no answers. The trail, it seemed, had gone cold forever. That is, until last spring, when two young hobbyists flying a drone deep in the coastal forest made a discovery. Tracking their lost drone to the base of an ancient spruce tree, they found something wedged deep inside its hollow. Clara's Kodak camera, untouched for over half a century, but it wasn't the camera itself that would finally break the 5 decades of silence. It was the undeveloped roll of film still sealed inside, and on its final, damaged frames were 3 chilling photographs. 3 images that would not only solve the mystery of what happened to Clara Hayes, but would finally expose the monster who had been hiding in plain sight all along. Astoria, Oregon. Even today, it's a town defined by its relationship with the sea and the sky. The waters of the Columbia River meet the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean under a blanket of persistent gray mist. Ferries glide through the water, and the iconic Astoria-Megler Bridge pierces the fog, connecting Oregon to Washington. In the autumn of 1971, the town was much the same, though perhaps a little quieter. The timber and fishing industries were the lifeblood of the community. Life moved at a slower pace, dictated by the tides and the seasons. It was a town where people knew their neighbors, where doors were often left unlocked, and where a dark secret could be buried under the weight of politeness and the passing of time. This was the world of Clara Hayes. At 28 years old, Clara was a figure of quiet consistency in Astoria. To the children who visited the public library, she was the soft-spoken librarian who could always find the perfect book, her gentle smile a comforting presence amongst the towering shelves. She was known for her kindness, her patience, and a certain shyness that kept her circle small, but her connections deep. Clara lived in a small, rented bungalow on a street lined with modest single-story homes. It was her sanctuary, a place filled with books, classical music records, and the smell of developing chemicals from her amateur photography hobby. Photography was more than a hobby for Clara. It was her language. It was how she processed the world and her place in it. With her simple Kodak Instamatic X15, a popular point-and-shoot camera of the era, she captured the things most people overlooked: the way rust crept over an abandoned fishing boat, the intricate patterns of moss on a forest floor, the fleeting expressions on the faces of strangers. Her photographs were her diary, a silent testament to the beauty she saw in the mundane. Her deepest connection was with her younger brother Samuel, who everyone called Sam. At 19, Sam was more outgoing and restless than his sister, but he admired her quiet strength and artistic eye. He was the most frequent subject of her photography and the keeper of her memory. One of their shared moments, forever etched in Sam's mind, took place just a month before she disappeared. They were walking near the waterfront, Clara with her camera in hand. Sam, impatient, had pointed at the bridge and told her to just take the picture. Clara stopped and gently corrected him, explaining that one doesn't just take a picture, one has to see it first. She had him notice the way the fog was wrapping around the steel, the lines of the structure. It wasn't about the bridge, she explained, it was about the feeling. She told him, "You have to see the picture before you take the picture." It was a lesson that would come to define his memory of her, a woman who saw the world in a way no one else did. Saturday, October 16th, 1971, began as an unremarkable autumn day. A cool breeze blew in from the Pacific, carrying the salty scent of the sea and the damp earth of the surrounding forests. The leaves on the deciduous trees had turned to brilliant shades of gold and amber. It was a perfect day for taking pictures. Clara spoke with Sam that morning. She was in good spirits, excited about the crisp autumn light. She told him she was going for a short drive, maybe a walk, to capture the fall colors along the coast. It was a routine they both knew well. She got into her pale blue sedan and drove off, her Kodak camera resting on the passenger seat beside her. Her last known sighting by anyone other than her killer was by a park ranger who saw her car parked at a popular viewpoint overlooking the ocean, a spot known for its dramatic cliffs and crashing waves. He saw a woman matching her description, walking towards a trail that led into the dense woods of what is now part of Ecola State Park. He thought nothing of it. It was a common sight. By evening, Clara had not returned home. Sam, who had planned to have dinner with her, felt the first prickle of unease. He called her house. No answer. He drove to her bungalow. The lights were off. He used his spare key to let himself in. The silence inside was heavy, unnatural. In the small kitchen, a half-eaten sandwich, tuna salad on white bread, sat on a plate on the table. Beside it, a cup of half-finished tea had gone cold. It was a scene frozen in time, a tableau of a life interrupted with jarring suddenness. It looked as if she had just sat down to eat, or had just returned and was about to, before something, or someone, called her away. Her purse and wallet were on the counter. The only things missing were her car keys, her coat, and her Kodak camera. A frantic Sam called the police. When her car was officially found at the Viewpoint parking lot the next morning, a full-scale search was launched. But as the hours turned into days and the days into weeks, a horrifying reality began to set in. Clara Hayes, the quiet librarian who saw the world in pictures, had walked into the forest and vanished without a trace. The initial search for Clara Hayes was frantic and widespread. For weeks, teams of officers and local volunteers combed the dense, unforgiving forests of the Oregon coast. They navigated steep ravines, pushed through thick undergrowth, and scanned the violent surf that crashed against the cliffs below. Every turned, stone and parted branch, however, led only to more questions. There was no sign of a struggle, no discarded belongings, not a single footprint that could be definitively identified as hers. The investigation, led by the Astoria Police Department, was professional and thorough by the standards of 1971. But those standards were limited by the technology of the time. Without the tools of modern forensics, no DNA analysis, no cell phone pings, no surveillance footage, detectives were left with little more than instinct and legwork. They interviewed dozens of people, friends, library colleagues, and residents who lived near the park. No one had seen anything unusual. In the absence of evidence, theories began to form, attempts by law enforcement to place a logical frame around an illogical event. The first and most prevailing theory was that Clara had simply walked away. They learned of her quiet nature, her shyness. Perhaps, they speculated, the pressures of her solitary life had become too much. Perhaps she had saved money and boarded a bus to start over somewhere new, a place where no one knew her name. The second theory was more tragic, but equally plausible. The cliffs along the Oregon coast are notoriously treacherous. A single misstep on a slippery, moss-covered trail could easily send a person plunging into the cold, turbulent waters below, leaving no trace. It was an accident that had claimed lives before and would claim lives again. A flicker of hope emerged 2 weeks into the investigation. A report came in about a transient man who had been seen camping in the woods not far from where Clara's car was found. Detectives tracked him down in a neighboring county. For a moment, it seemed they had their first real lead, but the man had a rock-solid alibi. He had been working a documented day labor job at the time of Clara's disappearance, miles away from Astoria. The lead dissolved, leaving the investigators back where they started, with nothing. Decades later, one of the original lead detectives on the case, long since retired, would reflect on the deep frustration of the era. He said that in 1971, a crime scene was what you could see with your own 2 eyes. If a clue wasn't visible, it essentially didn't exist. He spoke of how the forest itself felt like an accomplice, a vast, silent entity that had swallowed Clara whole, leaving them to search for a ghost. The case, he admitted, became a weight he carried for the rest of his career, the one that got away, the one that never offered a single clue to grasp. As the official investigation wound down, the case file grew thicker with reports, but no closer to a conclusion. It was passed from one detective to another over the years, a local legend, a cautionary tale. For the world, Clara Hayes became a fading photograph on a missing persons poster. But for her brother Sam, the search never ended. The passage of time did not heal his wound. It only deepened it. In the years that followed, Sam became the sole guardian of his sister's memory, a vigil he kept with quiet, heartbreaking devotion. He refused to sell their family home. He left Clara's small bedroom untouched, exactly as she had left it that October morning. Her books remained on the shelves, her clothes in the closet, a faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air. It was not a memorial. It was a bedroom waiting for its occupant to return. For Sam, accepting she was gone felt like a betrayal he was unwilling to commit. He lived his life around the gaping hole she had left behind. He got a job at the local cannery, fell in love, and tried to build a future. But every milestone was tinged with the bitterness of her absence. In the mid-1980s, Sam got married. The wedding was a joyful occasion, a celebration of new love held in a small community hall. Family and friends gathered. There was music and laughter. But during the reception, many guests noticed a poignant, deliberate detail. At the main table, next to Sam, sat an empty chair. It wasn't decorated or marked with a sign. It didn't need to be. Everyone knew who it was for. Throughout the evening, Sam would occasionally glance at the chair, his expression shifting from a smile to a look of profound, silent sorrow. The empty seat was a testament to his undying hope and his unending grief. It was a declaration that even on his happiest day, his family was not whole. Clara was still missing. Years turned into decades. The world changed. The cannery, where Sam worked, closed down. The town of Astoria evolved, attracting new people, new businesses. But for Sam, time remained frozen on October 16, 1971. He grew older. His hair turned gray, but the image of his 28-year-old sister, the girl with the Kodak camera, remained as vivid as ever. He was haunted not by her memory but by the mystery itself, the endless, agonizing question of what had happened to her in those woods. It was a question that had no answer, a story with no end. And so the silence continued, heavy and absolute, for 52 long years. For 52 years, the story of Clara Hayes remained a static, tragic poem. But a poem is a closed loop, a finished piece of art. What no one knew was that Clara's story wasn't a poem. It was a novel, and the final explosive chapter had simply been waiting to be read. The story resumes in the spring of 2023. The world is a different place, connected by invisible signals and documented by eyes in the sky. This new world is embodied by Leo and Jenna Martinez, a young, adventurous couple from Portland. Their weekends were spent exploring the natural beauty of the Pacific Northwest, but with a modern twist. They were avid drone hobbyists, always searching for a unique perspective, a shot no one else had captured. On a bright, clear Saturday in April, they brought their new drone to Ecola State Park. Their goal was to capture the dramatic coastline from a vantage point far from the crowded official trails. They pushed their drone to its limits, sending it soaring over the dense canopy of the ancient forest, chasing the perfect panoramic shot of the sea stacks against the crashing waves. And then, it happened. The live feed on Leo's controller suddenly froze, replaced by a single, stark message. Signal lost. There was a moment of panic, followed by determined action. The drone's last known GPS coordinates were still on the screen. It had gone down somewhere in the thick woods, far from any marked path. Disappointed but undeterred, they began their trek, using a map on Leo's phone to navigate the rugged terrain, bushwhacking their way toward the last signal. After nearly an hour of searching, the GPS tracker led them to the base of a colossal Sitka spruce tree. It was a giant, a silent sentinel that had likely stood for centuries, its trunk wider than a car, and its bark thick with moss and history. Their drone was there, lying tangled but intact in the gnarled roots at the tree's base. As Leo carefully worked to free the drone, Jenna scanned their surroundings, catching her breath from the hike. Her eyes traced the immense trunk of the spruce, and she noticed something odd. About 4 feet up, there was a deep hollow, a dark scar in the ancient wood, and wedged deep inside that hollow, something unnatural caught her eye. It wasn't wood or rock. It had a strange, rectangular shape, and it was caked in decades of dirt and dried moss. Curious, she reached into the hollow. Her fingers closed around a hard plastic object. She pulled it free. It was a camera, an old one. Its strap had mostly rotted away, and it was so weathered it was barely recognizable. But as they brushed away the grime, a familiar, iconic brand name became visible: Kodak. Specifically, a Kodak Instamatic. It was a relic, an antique from a bygone era. Their first thought was that it was a piece of trash, discarded long ago. But it felt heavy, solid, It felt like it still had a story. Back at their apartment in Portland that evening, the couple's curiosity deepened. Leo, a tech enthusiast with a respect for old gadgets, handled the camera with care. He wondered if there could possibly be film inside, and if, by some miracle, it had survived. In the controlled darkness of their windowless bathroom, he gently pried open the camera's body. His fingers met with resistance, then a soft click. There, nestled in its compartment, was a 126 film cartridge. It was intact. In that moment, the tone in the room shifted. This was no longer just a cool vintage find. This was a time capsule, a camera, found in such a remote and bizarre location, with undeveloped film inside. It could be nothing, or it could be something incredibly important. They knew they couldn't just take it to a local photo lab. If there were images on that film, they belonged to someone, and the camera's strange location suggested a story far more complex than a simple lost possession. The next morning, Leo and Jenna Martinez drove back to the coast, but this time, they went to the Astoria Police Department. They handed over the old camera and the film cartridge, explaining the strange circumstances of its discovery. An officer took their statement, intrigued but skeptical. It was just an old camera after all. But as the object was logged into evidence, a senior detective overheard the location of the find, Ecola State Park, and his memory was jogged. He recalled the town's most famous cold case, the librarian who had vanished nearby, the girl who loved photography. He pulled the decades-old file on the disappearance of Clara Hayes. The discovery of that old Kodak in such an unlikely place left investigators with more questions than answers. It's incredible how a single item can rewrite history. If you, like me, are fascinated by these mysteries, consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss a single twist. The discovery of the Kodak Instamatic sent a jolt through the quiet corridors of the Astoria Police Department. What had been a forgotten file in a cold case cabinet was now a tangible link to the past, a potential key to a 52-year-old mystery. The camera and its precious film cartridge were carefully packaged and transferred from the small coastal town to the state-of-the-art Oregon State Police Crime Lab in Portland. The case of Clara Hayes was officially reopened. Leading the new investigation was Detective Isabella Rossi, a sharp, methodical investigator in her late 30s. Rossi specialized in cold cases. She believed that no case was truly unsolvable. Sometimes you just had to wait for science to catch up with history. The story of the librarian who vanished and the camera found in a tree captivated her. She took possession of the old case file, its pages yellowed and brittle, and spread them across her desk next to the sealed evidence bag containing the camera. The past and the present, side by side. The entire case now hinged on one fragile question: was there anything left on that roll of film? The task fell to the lab's forensic imaging unit. Their lead specialist explained the immense challenge to Detective Rossi. Film from that era, a Kodacolor X126 cartridge, was a delicate chemical tapestry. 52 years of fluctuating temperatures, humidity, and microbial decay could have easily erased any images, or worse, fused the film into a solid, unusable brick. The process of trying to develop it could be the very thing that destroyed it forever. It was a high-stakes archaeological dig on a microscopic scale. The specialists opted for a painstaking, low-temperature chemical process, designed to gently coax any latent images from the emulsion without shocking the fragile material. The narrator would explain this process in simple terms. They were essentially bathing the film in a specialized cocktail of chemicals, slowly bringing the temperature up by a single degree every few hours, hoping to awaken the ghosts captured on its surface. For 3 days, the lab worked in near silence. The film was successfully unspooled and developed in total darkness. The result was a strip of negatives, warped and discolored, but miraculously, it held images. The next step was digital. Each of the 24 frames was scanned at an incredibly high resolution, a process that took hours per image. Powerful software then began the slow work of digital restoration, correcting color, balancing exposure, and sharpening details that were nearly lost to time. Detective Rossi and her team waited, an entire investigation hanging in the balance. Finally, the imaging specialist called her into the lab. The photos were ready. On the large monitor, the first image appeared. It was a breathtaking shot of the Oregon coast, the waves frozen in a crash against the jagged rocks. The second, the third, the fourth, all were beautifully composed landscapes. It was Clara's work, her artistic eye evident in every frame. For the first 21 photographs, the team saw the world through her eyes, hauntingly beautiful, serene, and peaceful. It was a glimpse of her final solitary walk. Then the specialist clicked to the next file. Photo 22. The mood in the room shattered. The image was a chaotic, jarring departure from the others. The shot was taken from a low, panicked angle, clearly inside a vehicle. It showed the passenger side floor, littered with the dirt and debris of an older car. In the frame was a man's heavy work boot, its leather cracked with age, and next to it on the floor was a set of keys attached to a distinctive hand-carved wooden keychain. The angle suggested the camera was not at Clara's eye, but perhaps held low, near her lap. A secret, desperate snapshot. Rossi felt a chill. "Next one," she said, her voice tight. Photo 23 flashed onto the screen and everyone in the room instinctively recoiled. It was a face. A man's face, terrifyingly close and distorted by the camera's wide-angle lens. He was looking almost directly into the camera, his mouth contorted in a snarl of pure rage. The image was blurry, shaken, a testament to the terror of the moment it was captured. It was the face of a predator who had just realized his victim was fighting back in the only way she could. There was a heavy silence in the lab. This single frame changed everything. This was not an accident. This was not a woman who ran away. This was an abduction. "Is there anything else?" Rossi asked, her eyes still locked on the face of the ghost on her screen. The specialist nodded grimly and pulled up the final image. Photo 24 was almost completely black. At first glance, it appeared to be an accidental shot, the shutter firing with the lens cap on. But the specialist had run it through multiple enhancement filters. He isolated a small, slightly less dark area of the frame and magnified it. As he adjusted the contrast, a faint texture emerged from the blackness. It was a rough, woven pattern. "Burlap," the specialist said quietly, "or the lining of a car trunk." The implication was suffocating. The final photograph Clara Hayes ever took was likely from inside the trunk of her killer's car. The old theories were dead, incinerated by the light of a 52-year-old flash. Clara Hayes did not fall from a cliff. She did not run away to start a new life. She was taken. She was murdered. And for the first time in over half a century, her case had what it never had before: a crime scene, a sequence of events, and a face. The ghost in the tree had not only given them a victim's final moments, she had given them the face of her killer. The 3 photographs from Clara's camera had transformed the investigation, but they had not solved it. They provided a horrifying narrative, but the killer remained a ghost, a 52-year-old face, distorted by rage and time. Detective Isabella Rossi and her team now faced a new and daunting challenge. The face in photo 23 was their most promising lead, but it was also their most problematic. In 1971, there were no digital databases. The photo was a low-resolution, blurry image of a man who would now be decades older, likely in his 70s or 80s. They ran the image through the state's most advanced facial recognition software, comparing it against millions of driver's license photos, mugshots, and government IDs. The algorithm returned hundreds of potential, low-confidence matches. It was a digital haystack, too vast and unreliable to be of practical use. The ghost remained anonymous. Rossi knew that technology alone wouldn't solve this. She pivoted her strategy back to old-fashioned detective work, focusing on the tangible, unique details from Clara's secret photograph. Not the face, but the objects. The work boot from photo 22 was too generic, a style sold in countless stores. But the keychain was different. It was distinctive. It looked hand-carved, a piece of folk art with a unique shape. It was a long shot, but it was their best shot. 2 weeks after the film was developed, Detective Rossi held a press conference. She stood before a room of reporters, a large enhanced image of the keychain projected on the screen behind her. She did not release the photo of the face, wanting to hold that back as a strategic advantage. Instead, she appealed directly to the public, particularly to the older residents of Astoria and the surrounding counties. She asked them to look closely at the image of the keychain. She asked them to think back, to search their memories for anyone who might have made or owned such an item. The story was electric, and every local news station in Oregon ran the segment. The image of the strange wooden keychain was broadcast across the state and shared thousands of times on social media. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. The department's tip line rang off the hook, but the flood of information quickly became a frustrating deluge. The keychain, it turned out, bore a passing resemblance to a popular souvenir sold at a well-known tourist shop on the coast throughout the 70s and 80s. Dozens of well-meaning people called in, certain they recognized it. For 3 weeks, Rossi and her team were consumed by this red herring. They dutifully tracked down and interviewed over 50 men, now elderly, who were identified by callers as having owned a similar keychain. Each interview was a delicate process, a conversation with a man who had to be considered a potential suspect in a 52-year-old murder. One by one, each lead was exhausted and each man was cleared. The initial excitement soured into a grueling, methodical process of elimination. The investigation, it seemed, had hit a dead end. And then, one Tuesday evening, an 85-year-old woman named Alice sat in her quiet living room in a retirement community just outside Portland. She was watching the local evening news when the now familiar image of the keychain flashed onto the screen. She had seen the story before, but this time she put on her reading glasses and leaned closer. She wasn't just looking at keychain. She was looking at keychain. A jolt went through her, a shock of recognition so profound it felt like a physical blow. The shape, the type of wood, the specific way the loop was carved. It was all there. It was a memory she hadn't accessed in over 60 years. Her heart began to beat faster. She was just a teenager back then, a lifetime ago. Making a call seemed drastic. What if she was wrong? What could she possibly have to add? For a moment she considered just changing the channel, leaving the past where it belonged. But then she thought of the librarian, the poor girl who never came home. She thought of the fear she herself had sometimes felt back then, a feeling she had long since buried. With a trembling hand, she picked up the phone and dialed the number on the screen. The call was routed to Detective Rossi. Alice's voice was thin and hesitant at first. She explained that she had worked her first job as a teenager back in 1970 and 1971 at a small family-owned hardware store in downtown Astoria. The keychain, Alice said, her voice growing stronger with conviction. It wasn't from a tourist shop. The owner of the store, he made them himself. In his workshop, out back. Rossi sat bolt upright, every instinct firing. Who was the owner? What was his name? Mitchell, Alice replied. Robert Mitchell. Everyone just called him Bob. He was a pillar of the community, always smiling. He made those keychains for the store's 10th anniversary back in 1970. He gave one to every employee. I still have mine in a jewelry box somewhere. Rossi felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. This was the specific, verifiable detail she had been searching for. Alice, she said, keeping her voice calm. Is there anything else you remember about Mr. Mitchell? Did you ever see him interact with customers? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. He was always very friendly, Alice said slowly. But he had a way with the female customers. A little too friendly. It made some of us uncomfortable. I remember he used to talk to that librarian, Clara Hayes, when she came in. He seemed particularly interested in her. It was just a feeling. I was a kid, you know. I never would have thought to say anything. After she hung up the phone, Detective Rossi walked to the evidence board. She wrote a name in bold black marker and underlined it twice. Robert Mitchell. The ghost in the photograph suddenly had a name, and he wasn't a stranger or a transient. He was one of Astoria's own. The name Robert Mitchell fundamentally altered the investigation. The case was no longer about a mysterious phantom. It was about a man who had lived and worked among the very people searching for Clara Hayes. Detective Rossi's team immediately dove into public records, searching for any trace of the former hardware store owner. They found him quickly. He was 84 years old, living in a quiet retirement community in a suburb just outside of Salem, Oregon. The next step was to connect this man to the face in the photograph. Rossi's team pulled Robert Mitchell's 1970s Department of Motor Vehicles record. The grainy black and white photo showed a smiling, confident man in his early 30s. with the same eyes and facial structure as the enraged figure in Clara's last picture. To make the connection irrefutable, forensic artists used digital, aging software. They took the clear DMV photo and applied 52 years of aging. The result was a chillingly accurate portrait of the 84-year-old man they had just located. The match was undeniable, now with a name and a face. The scattered pieces of the puzzle fell into place, revealing the dark truth of what happened on October 16, 1971. Robert Mitchell, a charismatic and well-liked local business owner, had developed a private obsession with the quiet librarian who frequented his store. He mistook her gentle politeness for romantic interest. On that autumn Saturday, he saw her walking along the coast and pulled over, offering her a ride under the friendly pretense of a concerned neighbor. Clara, recognizing a familiar face from the community, accepted. Inside the car, Mitchell's friendly facade dropped. He made an advance, and when Clara firmly rejected him, his entitlement curdled into rage. In that terrifying moment, as he was consumed by his fury, Clara Hayes did the only thing she could. With incredible presence of mind, she lowered her Kodak camera to her lap and, without looking, began taking pictures, her finger blindly finding the shutter. She captured his boot, the keychain, and finally, his face, her camera's flash a silent scream for help. When Mitchell realized what she was doing, he attacked her. He killed her in a fit of rage, likely not far from where he had picked her up. To dispose of the evidence, he drove into the deep woods of the state park, a place he knew from his years of living in the area. He buried Clara's body in a shallow, unmarked grave. He took the camera, the only witness to his crime, and threw it with all his might into the dark hollow of the ancient spruce tree, believing it would rot away, swallowed by the forest forever. He had committed the perfect crime, a secret he would keep for over half a century. 2 days later, Detective Rossi and her partner drove to the quiet, manicured retirement community where Mitchell lived. His house was a small, tidy suburban home, complete with a perfectly mowed lawn and a bird feeder in the front yard. It was a picture of peaceful, respectable old age. Robert Mitchell answered the door himself. He was frail, leaning on a walker with thin white hair and pale blue eyes that seemed watery and harmless. He greeted them with the slightly confused, grandfatherly air of a man interrupted from his daily routine. "Can I help you, officers?" he asked, his voice soft. "Mr. Mitchell," Rossi began, her tone even and professional. "My name is Detective Rossi. We're reopening an old case from Astoria, the disappearance of Clara Hayes." Mitchell feigned a look of deep thought. "Oh my," he said, shaking his head slowly. "The librarian. Yes, I remember that. A terrible tragedy. We all wondered what happened to that poor girl. His performance was flawless. He was just another old man, dredging up a sad, distant memory." Rossi didn't challenge him. She simply held up a clear printed image of photo 22. It was the picture of the boot and the keychain on the floor of the car. "We have reason to believe she was in a vehicle with someone shortly before she disappeared," Rossi said. "We found this photograph. Do you recognize this keychain, Mr. Mitchell?" The change in him was subtle but immediate. A flicker in his pale eyes, a slight tightening of the muscles around his mouth. The friendly, confused mask was still there, but underneath it, the 32-year-old killer was stirring. "That was a long time ago." He deflected, his voice a little thinner now. "Lots of people had keychains like that." Rossi held his gaze. "Not like this one, Bob," she said, using his old nickname for the first time. "This one was handmade. Alice remembers you making them. She says you gave one to her in 1970 for the store's anniversary." The name Alice hit him like a physical blow. The past was no longer a vague memory. It had a name. His facade began to crack. He stammered, trying to form a denial, but the words wouldn't come. Then Rossi presented the second photograph, the final one, a clear, enhanced print of photo 23, the enraged, distorted face of his younger self, staring back at him from across 5 decades. "She saw you, Mr. Mitchell," Rossi said, her voice quiet but heavy with the weight of the truth. "Clara saw you, and she made sure we did too." He stared at the picture of the monster he had been. The walker trembled under his hands. The 84-year-old man seemed to shrink, collapsing under the weight of a secret he could no longer carry. The fight went out of his eyes, replaced by the hollow emptiness of defeat. The wall he had built around that day, stone by stone for 52 years, came crumbling down, and in a frail, raspy whisper the confession began. He recounted the events of that day, the dark truth finally escaping the prison of his mind, the words tumbling out after a lifetime of silence. With the culprits' confession, the brutal truth finally came to light, proving that perseverance can overcome decades of silence. If stories of justice like this inspire you, leave a like to support our research. Robert Mitchell's confession echoed across 5 decades, finally giving a voice to Clara Hayes' silent scream. He was arrested on the spot, the frail 84-year-old man in his tidy suburban home, charged with a murder committed more than half a century earlier. Faced with the irrefutable evidence from the camera and his own detailed confession, Mitchell waived his right to a trial. His defense attorney negotiated a plea deal. In exchange for pleading guilty and providing the exact location of Clara's remains, he would be spared the ordeal of a public trial. Given his age and failing health, he was sentenced to life in prison, a sentence he would begin in the medical wing of the state penitentiary. As part of his agreement, Mitchell drew a crude map for detectives, marking a remote spot deep within the woods he had known as a young man. He led them to a place far off any trail, an area of the forest that had remained largely undisturbed for decades. There, under the roots of a fallen fir tree, forensic anthropologists began a careful excavation. After 2 days of painstaking work, they found what Sam Hayes had been waiting 52 years for. They found his sister. The funeral for Clara Hayes was held on a crisp, clear autumn day, much like the one on which she had disappeared. The small church in Astoria was filled with people. Some were old enough to remember the initial shock of her disappearance, while others were younger, members of the community who had been captivated by the recent story of the camera in the tree. But the service was truly for one person, her brother, Sam. Now 81 years old, he stood before the casket, a man who had carried a half-century of unresolved grief on his shoulders. Today, however, his posture was different. The uncertainty was gone, replaced by a profound, heartbreaking peace. In his hands he held a small framed photograph. It was one of Clara's own, a beautiful, simple shot of the Astoria waterfront she had taken shortly before her death. He gently placed the frame on the casket, his final gift to the sister who had shown him how to see the world. The narrator will relay his words, spoken to the quiet congregation. He spoke of his sister's kindness, her quiet passion, and the lesson she had once taught him about photography. His voice, thick with emotion but steady with conviction, delivered the perfect epitaph for her life and the incredible story of her case. He said, "She always told me you have to see the picture before you take it. And in the end, her pictures made sure we all saw the truth." Robert Mitchell died in the prison hospital less than a year into his sentence, taking the full story of his motives to his grave. But he had already given the Hayes family the only thing that mattered. He gave them Clara back. The case of Clara Hayes and the Kodak camera became a landmark for Oregon law enforcement. It is now used as a training model for cold case units, a powerful example of how modern forensic imaging, combined with persistent, old-fashioned detective work, can overcome insurmountable odds. It proved that no amount of time can completely erase the truth, especially when it has been captured on film. But Clara's legacy extends beyond the annals of police work. With a small inheritance and donations from the community, Sam Hayes established the Clara Hayes Memorial Grant. It's a small fund, administered by the Astoria Public Library where she once worked, that provides cameras and free photography classes to local children who might not otherwise have the opportunity. Her passion now lives on, passed down to a new generation, ensuring she is remembered not for the way she died, but for the beauty she saw in the world. Her story, which began with a silent, solitary act of creation, has ended with a chorus of new voices, each learning to see the picture before they take it. The story of Clara Hayes teaches us that no voice should be silenced forever. Your subscription isn't just a click. It's an echo that amplifies these stories and strengthens our community. Please help this community get louder and stronger. Subscribe, and let us know in the comments from which city you watched this incredible conclusion.